Hello and welcome to another episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast series. And in this episode I talked with Tina Kemp. We talked about runes, we talked about tarot, we started talking about liminal people, we talked about all kinds of magical topics. And finally Tina shared some really interesting experiences that she'd had that she related to Faery and I to liminal people. So please, here's Tina Kemp. Enjoy.
Well, I really grew up with it, to be honest. I had a grandmother who was, at one side, she was a devout Catholic that went to church every Friday, and she even wore her little granny cap, to become of extra devout. But on the other hand, she knew everything about every weed, every herb, every plant. She knew everything about it. And she didn't just know what to do with it in terms of homeopathy or medicine, but she also knew, no, if you want to keep the fairies away from your door, you have to plant this plant. If you want to have good luck, you need to keep this plant in your pocket, in your left pocket, and all sorts of things like that. So I was very fascinated by that. My mother and my sister were not interested in these things at all, but I was. So of course, she told me everything. She imbued me with her wisdom. And from there, it evolved into other things, because she also talked about magic and tarot. She never talked about runes, because I think she didn't know that herself. And I stumbled across that myself. And I had this moment that I really thought but this seems so familiar somehow, and I can't really explain why that is, but it seems familiar. But I was also a very impulsive teenager with lots of anger issues. And I got into all sorts of trouble, and eventually that fell a bit to the wayside until much later in life. I was in my late 20s and I found them again because we were moving. And I had this sudden, oh, wow, I had forgotten about this. And I got to reading much more into it. And I discovered that it is so much deeper and it goes so much further than what you hear about in these bullshit books like, oh, this one stands for wealth and this one stands for strength. Well, in essence, that is not even untrue, but it's so superficial to borderline childish even, while there's a whole philosophy behind each rune. There's a world of information behind each symbol.
Well, can you back up and tell us, because runes, I've never really understood runes. It's one area that I've never really had any exposure to. I'm aware of them, but I've never talked to anybody that utilized them in any sort of a serious way. So when I see, your webpage and stuff, Facebook page that you have, and you actually make runes and things to order, that really intrigued me. What is the origin of runes? What are they? What are they meant to? What purpose were they meant to serve? And how do you use them now?
They are basically a prehistoric script, which is a contradiction in terms, really, because script is the beginning of history, but they are a script and they can be used as an alphabet, and they have been used as an alphabet, but they can also, just like a hieroglyph, there is a meaning behind each symbol. They are very stylized symbols, and they represent images. I'm not sure what the word is anymore, but like a hieroglyph. But
like a pictogram or something.
Yes, exactly. That is the word. And with each symbol comes, of course, a meaning and a deeper meaning. And there's layers of meaning to something. Like when you see a spear, for instance, you think of combat. That is the first thing you think about. But why is that combat happening? Why did they have to develop this spear for this particular purpose of combat? Because it can also be a warning. If you plant a spear in the ground, it's a symbol to stay away, which we still use today in the iron fences. If there are little spearheads on top of them, it is a clear sign to say, don't enter. We will use violence on you if you do. And then later, people started to discover that these things have been used in divination, but I don't really like to call it divination myself, because they're more of a tool for introspection, which is what they were originally used for, just like tarot. Yes, there are people that can use them for divination very successfully, I may add, but these people also have something else. They have that gift that's not given to everybody. But for an introspective tool, they can be very brutal, because they're more primordial almost than the tarot. The tarot is much more refined in its symbology, while runes are not. They depict simple images and sometimes even gods. Like, for instance, the rune that is shaped like an F is actually the god Odin standing there with his cloak waving behind him, and that in itself is Odin in his battle aspect. So, and how in his battle aspect as the leader, as the guy that is rallying his troops, not just a mere soldier. And that is a very important figure in an army, because you need that guy to inspire your troops, to give them bravery, but also to help them eliminate fear of the enemy.
Right. And like the tarot obviously is like it's almost like a book. It sort of tells a story as you go through the cards. Are the runes similar, or are they more like just an alphabet?
They don't tell a story as such. Yes, you can find elements of Norse mythology behind every rune. That is true, but they are not as refined as the tarot.
Yeah.
I will admit that it's more crude. It's much more crude.
Yeah.
But it's also, look at where they originated. These people had no time for bullshit. There was a very harsh climate. It was very difficult to survive. You just didn't have time to go through these.
Yeah.
Every detail, every minutia, that's all not important. What matters is the cold, hard facts, what you need to hear now.
Yeah. And what drew you to creating them for other people?
Various things. I liked creating them first. And I made my own sets myself. My first set, I made them myself. And it's just, I like doing it. That's really the only explanation. I feel like I'm doing something that I'm supposed to be doing. And a very funny synchronicity with that is when, I don't know if you know him, but a guy that made a certain, a certain program that can be found online, and that if you type a word in or your own name, it searches the book of law of Aleister Crowley.
So it's like a numerology within a book. Yeah, yeah.
And it fetches out sentences with the same numerological
value. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. As the word you type in. And when I type my name in, I got runes shall make.
Wow.
And that I found that out way after I already started making them. And that was a bit of my, whoa, that's very cool.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah, I've played with some of that numerology stuff, but there's just, again, it's one of those things where there's multiple different versions of how to do it. And unless you're willing to dedicate the time to the research, it becomes, in the end, it's quite confusing as to why you would use different versions. And there's one that I have used. It's oh gosh, what's his name? I've done a podcast with him in my first series. He wrote the book about the euphonauts, and
the guy that I'm talking about, Alan Greenfield.
Yeah, Alan Greenfield. So that's the guy you're talking about. That's the one I use. Yeah, that's the one I've used.
That's the one I used.
And and that one I've had some quite interesting results with, actually. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
I remember when I think I've told the story when I was meditating in one of these Slavic ruined rotunda churches, and I sensed the presence of somebody and started asking, "Who are you?" And I had this sort of image of an old guy, with beard and stuff, and I eventually figured out what the name was. It was Volk Vasduk, and Volk is wolf and Vasduk is breath or air. So I took it that his name was Wolf's Breath, right? And so I took his name and put it in that thing, and I got some really, really amazing, feedback from that. So I use it quite routinely. It's amazing. You're the only other person I've ever come across that's used it.
Yeah, I found Alan Greenfield through a YouTube series called Hellier.
Yeah, me too. See that?
Thoroughly fascinated with.
Until I watched Hellier, I'd never heard of the man. I had no idea what this euphonauts thing was, and it intrigued me. And the funny thing is ever since I watched that series, when I'm out and about dowsing in the remote regions of the Czech Republic, I quite often find balloons. And it freaks me out. Do you remember the episode where they kept finding balloons? Yeah. Oh, I tell you what, it's quite weird when you start finding balloons in the middle of the forest and things. I mean, okay, balloons, obviously party balloons are all over the place, and they're going to fall where they fall. But still, it's kind of like, oh my God.
Oh, right in front of you.
Hell yeah.
I had an experience like that, but not with a balloon, but with a tin can. I was still in Belgium at the time, and I had a part-time job in a swamp. And I was doing my usual round, and there was this. I had just watched that episode the night before, I was walking around, and there is this perfect tin can without a label, just sitting there right on my path, and I'm like, what are you doing there? And this was perfect. They had no rust on it. It had no signs of being used. It was clean also. And that was amazing. That really, I didn't dare touch it.
You didn't touch it? I was going to say, what was inside of it?
Nothing. I watched it like, what? And it was just a clean, perfect tin can without a label or anything. And I didn't touch it because I was thinking like, no, I'm not. I have had fairy experiences in this forest before, and I am not gonna touch it. So I just left it alone, and I never saw it again.
Interesting. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I was quite surprised when he agreed to talk to me, because he had no idea who I was, obviously, and it was quite a good chat, as I remember. But he definitely has some interesting political views.
I don't know. I have to watch that episode, because that sounds great, actually.
Yeah, it was good. So what else do you do? Tarot as well? Is that correct?
I did at some point, but I dropped them a little bit, because I find runes more, they speak to me more, and I'm really very successful with them. I do rune readings for people, and I get great feedback on those. And when I even think about doing the same thing with tarot readings for people, I get a bit of a mental restraint, almost like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. But with runes, if I'm doing a reading for somebody, I pick up on the person very easily when I'm holding runes, while I don't have that with tarot at all. And I just run with it while I'm doing it. And it's like the gods themselves just put that information in my brain, and it comes out of my fingertips while I'm typing a reading down. So I really think I should just stick to those.
Yeah, that connection. I when I was a teenager, probably about 18 or 19, I was interested in developing, like, I guess you'd call it channeling now, but back then I didn't know what to call it, and I had quite the gift for it. And there was one evening in City of Hull, me and a couple of buddies went to one of the local discos down in the Docks region, and for some reason, I don't know why, I decided to start connecting, as I called it. And apparently I spent like 2 hours lecturing everybody on spirituality. And, I didn't do it again after that, because obviously I got a reputation that I didn't want.
I get that, because
I don't remember anything. All I remember is, I'll do this, and then gone. And
then all of a sudden it's indeed gone, and you see people looking at you like,
looking at me like, what on earth are you smoking?
It does make you the oddball out, these things. I felt that very much when I was in high school. I was not. Well, it's not that I wasn't that I was unpopular or anything, or that I didn't have friends. I did have friends. But it was a certain type of person that just plainly didn't like me, and would never like me, and still doesn't like me.
And they're often the ones that just don't that are just totally not into it, don't believe anything, very skeptical, and kill any possibility for everybody else of anything really happening if they're around.
True. And now I just stay away from these people as well. I have nothing to say to them. They have nothing to say to me. Fine, let's agree to disagree and go our separate ways.
I can imagine. I'll tell you another story, because since we're talking about school day reputations, everybody thought I was a bit of a freaky person as well, right? Because I was in England back then, we had religious education classes, right? 1 hour a week. And in the religious education class, they would teach, like, comparative religions and that kind of thing. And then the teacher ran out of ideas. So he said, has anybody, got any ideas? And I said, no, I'll do a class on spiritualism. He says, okay. So the next week I came in, and I got there, and I'm like giving it everything, talking about Steiner and anthroposophy and goodness knows what, Blavatsky and all this stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, they're all captivated, as you would, as a 16-year-old or whatever. And it was only afterwards I realised they're all sat there like, my God, who let him out of the madhouse?
There are certain types of people that are just not... they're not ready to hear these things, and maybe they'll never be ready. But
No.
this is inconceivable for these people. They're also very uncreative people.
Yeah.
I've found.
Yeah, there was another time I went on a geology field trip, and there was a disco at the end of it held by the hotel. And I met this really, really nice girl. I mean, I was only like 16, 17, should be like the same age. And so I walked with her to her home, and this was in Devon because we were on a trip. And anyway, we got talking about this stuff, and she told me her parents were witches and that they wouldn't appreciate my interest in her. And I said, nonsense. And then when I got back to the hotel, the atmosphere in my room was like dreadful, and I started to, see this thing appearing in the corner of the room. I was sharing the room with a friend, and this kept him up because I was obviously getting terrified as to what was happening. So I got a bar of soap and I drew a magic circle around my bed in soap. Well, if I go back to the school today and I meet the geology teacher by accident, he still brings up the magic circle that I made in soap.
What
Again, it
happens?
didn't do my reputation much good.
No, I bet it didn't. But you got to do what you got to do. I mean,
But it
these things
worked.
do work. Yeah,
Yeah, it worked. I triggered something. I tell you, she wasn't lying. Something was triggered that evening. Anyway, so I was going to also ask you. You did an interesting video with Thomas about the Ninth Gate movie, and that was I enjoyed that and some of the follow-up videos you did because that movie is one of my favorite movies. My take on it was she was Lucifer. That was my take when I watched it, that she was Lucifer, and that was all there was to it. And it wasn't like evil necessarily. It was more like the light bringer.
I thought that originally, and I also said that in my talk with Thomas.
Yeah.
But I was thinking more about it, and I actually think she is the referee, the gamekeeper.
I remember you saying, and I've watched a couple of other videos of sort of film, more film buff type people with a bit of knowledge talking about it as well. And there's a lot of opinions but they seem to fall into several camps, and one of them is Lucifer, and the other one is, like as you say. But it was a hell of a movie, and she had that look somehow with the green eyes, and that look very evocative.
Also with her accent, that worked very well in that role because it's so ambiguous. You cannot really pinpoint it. It could be French. It could be something else. And
the way they used the book and the images in the book as well was to me like wow, this is like real magical stuff. This,
I've come to the conclusion that there is real occult wisdom in that movie, but you have to be.
Where did it come from? Does it? I mean, who wrote that in?
It's a book originally, the Club Duma.
Yeah, but the book is nothing
different.
Like
it's not like that. No.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's that actor. I think a lot of movie makers actually are occultists.
Yeah.
And it's not that they necessarily want us to know that about them, but there is something that they wish to convey. And I do think that ultimately they do that because they care about humanity, or they care about certain people within humanity, at least. And they want that knowledge to be passed on somehow. Just like there are a lot of children cartoons that are modern day present that are actually very, very embedded with a lot of old mythology. And even in cartoons, you wouldn't even think about it, like the Powerpuff Girls. There is a channel called Minds Unveiled that did a whole theatrics about it, and it's very interesting. And you come to the conclusion of, wow, the creator of the Powerpuff Girls is actually an occultist. And that is okay for children. And these children, when they see these cartoons, they have no idea what they're looking at. But then later, when they grow older and they find that out for themselves, if they find these things out for themselves, that light switch goes on. And it's like, oh, wow, that is amazing. And that is a great feeling to have as an adult, because that sense of wonder, it brings that right back, and it reminds you that the world is truly strange. And it's nothing like this mundane, bland, mediocre ensemble.
Oh, no. Yeah. No, the power of magic and myth for kids. I mean, I went down the route of reading the Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, but I ventured off into more esoteric stuff. And I couldn't even tell you who wrote it. I mean, obviously the Wizard of Earthsea series was devoured, but then there was other books that I read that it was about, a sick boy home from school, and he had a picture on his wall, and he went into the picture and had an adventure. And such magical and mythological meaning and value and structure in it. And it really appealed to me. So I guess I always knew I was going to turn out weird.
Yeah. I've noticed that a lot of children that read a lot, and not all children do, but the ones that do read a lot, and they just disappear into their own minds. And when you call them, they don't even hear it because they're so far gone. These children are just different from the majority of them. They have a real gift, a gift of the mind, of the psyche.
Well, right there, you got the imagination, I think, because the imagination is so strong that it becomes almost indivisible from reality. In fact, it is reality. The imagination becomes reality, and that certainly was true for me. That I could literally see, the book unfold in my mind, like a movie. I can't do that now. Actually, if I read a book now, it doesn't work the same way anymore. I guess I grew up. It's a bit like Peter Pan, yeah. The thing about the ninth gate that sometimes strikes me, and I don't know if there's any truth in this at all or not, or whether you would agree, but it seemed to, for me, sort of contrast this sort of Christian paradigm of black and white, good and bad, with this more, what I would call pagan type view that actually it's not good and bad, it just is, right? Sometimes you have to do things that you wouldn't really want to do, and the world is just the world is the world, and you just have to do what you've got to do. And so I always saw him as like, he's the last person. He's not really a nice sort of character, he's cheating people with out of money for books, but they're not very nice people anyway, so do you really care? He's a smoker, he's a drinker, he's casual sex with the woman, and he even killed somebody, I suppose, and so why would he be the one that would be chosen? But on the other hand, he is a man with a mission, and he's fulfilling that mission step by step, and he's doing what it takes to get there. And I always thought that was an I don't know if you agree with me, but that was like, to me, it was like, hang on, everybody's running around trying to be like Jesus, all nice and wonderful and without sin. But actually, if you live in the real world and you're subject to the forces of the real world, the gods, if you want, the gods and goddesses, then I'm sorry, you've got to have more wits about you, and you've got to have the ability to do things and to be called upon and challenged and respond in ways that perhaps wouldn't be considered to be polite or nice, right?
That is actually that's something that comes back in runic philosophy a lot. There is no concept of sin in that at all. Yeah, I do agree. I mean, there's Christian symbolism in the movie, but there's also a lot of hermeticism in it.
Yeah.
And that is, I don't know that much about hermeticism, but what I do know about it is that there is also not really a concept of sin, but there is the concept of cause and effect. So if you go around doing evil things to people, you're going to have to expect some of them to want to take revenge on you at some point. Yeah. And about the character in the movie, of all of them, he is the only one that went in there with a genuine interest, or what becomes a genuine interest, because they all have an agenda. All the characters have an agenda, but he just pursues it because at a certain point, it's all he has left. His reputation is just gone. His money can be taken away from him. He has no home anymore. There are people after him wanting to kill him, so he just decides for himself, I'm going to do this now.
Yeah. And
because he gives it is his all, I think that's what the reward eventually was, that he reaches that gnosis.
Yeah. Yeah. And I sometimes wonder, what I'm up to. And I don't know if you find a parallel here, but doing what I do, the dowsing and the sort of connecting with the earth and working with the earth energies, I begin to realize it's having an effect on me that I never expected. And in fact, even last night, someone said to me, kind of jokingly, why do you look so young? Because I'm 63 and some people think I'm like 40, I mean, I don't think I look 40, but I look a bit younger than I am. And I suddenly realized that working with these earth energies is actually having a magical effect on me because it's energizing me. And I do believe it's keeping me somewhat youthful in appearance and also in energy, you know? So to me, there's a lot more to magic than most people realize. You know, I'm trying to explain for people watching that maybe don't know so much, but it's like it's a journey into yourself. It's a journey into the beyond. It just changes you, but also has an effect on you that is magical in itself. Do you know what I'm saying?
The purpose of magic for me personally is to achieve a sense of profound tranquility. And to have that as something that reverberates throughout your life, wherever you're going, something that you can fall back on, just this. And that is a great treasure to have in life. There's so much chaos around us, and that is something that you cannot change. But that is the change within yourself. That is the alchemy that happens within yourself. That is a great and fantastic and beautiful thing. And I think that everybody should have at least a chance to achieve that for themselves. And magic is a great way to do that. And magic is also so misunderstood, I find, because a lot of people, I imagine, especially Christian Bible belters, will think like Harry Potter, you mean? Like, no, of course not. Don't be stupid. That is a children's story, and it doesn't work that way, obviously. It's also not sitting in front of a candle all evening muttering chants to it. It's not that. I don't like. There are so many different ways of achieving a magical state and having a magical outcome of a situation. It's basically trying to affect the world around you through sheer power of will.
Yeah, and because I'm also interested in you know, science, being a scientist, and quantum physics, and it always amuses me that some of the quantum physicists have basically described magical actions in scientific terminology as if they discovered it, which they didn't. And yet people still don't get it. You know, it's okay. Well, what's it going to take for you to understand that your attitude, your expectations, your belief, your mindset dictate the way your life goes and how everything interacts with you? And that's, you know, you can say, I can say that scientifically there's evidence to support that that's the case. Yes. So why can't you accept it? Why are you a skeptic and question all this stuff? You know, follow the science. Why don't you?
There is a document that can be downloaded for free on the CIA website where they said the exact same thing. And this was a study done in the 70s, which was then released under the Freedom of Information Act. And they say the exact same thing. Yes, magic is real. Yes, you can affect reality. It is plastic. There's plasticity to reality.
Yeah. So, you know, you talk about the chaos, and I'm aware there's some chaos in the world, but I don't watch the news, and I try not even to bother about it. And, you know, it doesn't affect me. Maybe it's selfish to say something like that, but if I'd have lived 200 years ago, I wouldn't know it was happening. It wouldn't affect me either. So what's the difference? And to some extent, I think that if more of us just switched off the news and decided we're not going to allow this this black magic to work on us and push our emotional energy in the direction that people want to manipulate it, then a lot of this chaos would disappear.
Would in your personal life, if it exists on the other side of the world, you don't know about that. So who cares?
Exactly. Cool.
But what I have, there are people that I think the NPC, I think that is a real thing, and I cannot decide if that is something that is like a virus. Is that a creation of a purposeful creation? And if it is, then there is a seriously sinister purpose behind that. Because if a person is a husk, an empty shell, and there's nothing in there, the lights are on, but nobody's home, and these people do exist, then what is their actual purpose? I heard that theory that they are filler, the background people, but that doesn't really, then why is it fostered as well? This mindset is fostered.
Well, maybe they're just starting out, you know? Maybe that's how you start out. I mean, I have issues with reincarnation. On the other hand, I certainly have what I contend would be memories of other lives, which is a dichotomy. But I don't know if you know Anthony Peake. Maybe you watched the podcast I did with him. But I think he is probably on the right track in the sense that he thinks you live the same life over and over and over again. until you get it right. But he now has incorporated reincarnation into it by saying, you know, you have a sprite, you have a, I can't forget his terminology, you have a character that lives and dies and plays the game, and you have someone that's animating the character playing the game. But actually, this is just like the equivalent of one episode in the game. So you can have multiple episodes of the game, which would be then multiple lives, right? So you would live one life over and over, and then live another life over and over. So maybe there is room for reincarnation, but if there was such a thing as reincarnation, and if there is such a thing as starting out as it's my first time that I switched on the PC and started to play the game, and I get 5 yards in and shot in the head by one of the criminals, and I've got to start again. Maybe that's what we're talking about here. Maybe some of us have actually made it through to level 50, or after doing this multiple times, millions of times, and others are just switched on the machine and started. Maybe that explains that phenomena. Because a lot of that seems to be about having an internal conversation, and I think Thomas was probably the one that pointed out the research recently that suggested that so a large percentage of people don't have an inner dialogue.
Yeah.
And you just have to, I can't imagine not having an inner dialogue. I mean, but I've talked to people, and I've now met people that will readily admit that they don't have an inner dialogue.
Never, ever.
No.
That's.
I mean, it's,
yeah. That's terrible to me. That sounds awful. I don't mean offense to these people, but that would be awful to me.
Like on automatic pilot. Maybe they're AI. I mean, it is bizarre.
A guy at some point that lived, and I think that's also something that Thomas mentions. This guy that was apparently working at a post office or something, and one day he died, and they did an autopsy on him, and he didn't have a brain, but he lived and worked like everybody else. He was a bit of an oddball, maybe, that didn't socialize too much, but he could communicate enough to get a job and keep a job, a simple job that didn't require much of him, but he did it, and he lived on his own, or at least he was able to function within society. And that is so weird to me. I mean, that always happens.
To me, that just shows that the brain and consciousness are two different things. Consciousness doesn't need a brain, and it's certainly the brain doesn't create consciousness.
No. I think the brain is just a receiver.
Yeah, me too.
A radio station.
Yeah.
Jerry Marzinski also talks about this, that all these thoughts you're having, and sometimes you have this very violent or ugly thought that comes out of nowhere, that is just things whispering to your brain. Who knows if maybe they are demons, maybe they are entities, maybe they're even the thoughts of somebody else that's thinking them very loudly.
You see, I also have a theory on this, because I've come across what I call liminal people. And because of the interest in all the paranormal sort of genres, the Men in Black and Black-Eyed Kids and Shadow People and all, and I've written a lot of books that are not just telling other people's stories of exposure to these things, but also my own, and trying to figure out what the hell is this phenomenon and what does it mean. And I just came to the conclusion that we must live in this whole parallel set of worlds. Like you're tuning in an old-fashioned radio, and as you go through, you're picking up various stations and bands, but you're only picking up the bit that you're receiving. So we're living in this sort of very narrow bandwidth, and some of us can see a bit more bandwidth, like a dog or a cat can see or hear other sounds and sights. And so that would fit, because what it would mean is that there are beings above us on bandwidth that are probably more evolved, more advanced spiritually or whatever, and there are beings that are lower down on the bandwidth that are not as evolved. And so you've got demons and angels sitting on each shoulder, because that's where they sit in the bandwidth.
Yeah.
And that would then also, fit right into what you just said about all these thoughts coming in, because your mind is the receiver, and for some reason at some particular point in time, it becomes open to some of these other bandwidths that normally you wouldn't have exposure to. And it would also explain various forms of madness as well, where they're hearing voices and things like this. But
This is what the
Who am I
shamanic
to
state
apply?
tries to achieve. No, but I mean, this is not just a Christian thing about angels and demons, but
No.
in shamanism, you have the higher world, middle world, and the
Yeah.
lower world. And our middle world is, the middle world is a spirit world as well, but it runs parallel with our own. So you have a higher world and a lower world, so angels and demons, if you will. And the shamanic state tries to contact, or at least see, or in some way communicate with these worlds to gain something out of it, knowledge and insight, creativity, whatever. Sometimes just to satisfy a curiosity. I think that is valid.
So I don't know. I know you're interested in the Scandinavian stuff, but have you can't speak. Have you ever investigated the Slavic side? Because I think the Slavic somehow is related to the Scandinavian. It seems to be the same pantheon with different names.
I'm a bit ashamed to say this, but when I got mostly interested in Slavic mythology was through the Witcher game.
Aha, yes.
And I did a brilliant job, and I found it so beautifully done. And but unfortunately, I never took the time to actually study it. But I do have a friend who is very interested in it, and he shares stuff with me on social media, which I do read every time he does them. And that is a really, I mean, it is very beautiful. I have no personal affinity with it, but yeah, I find it very beautiful. Every time he sends me something, I never get this, yeah, that's not really my thing. No. It's always like, wow, that's really cool, actually, and I like it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely interested me, and I'm still learning. I don't pretend to be any kind of an expert, but I've certainly done some, I guess, invocation of the gods and goddesses, and that's been quite rewarding. And actually, I mean to do some more of that because it was very rewarding, and I want to sort of go over old ground and do it again and get a bit deeper. But I've also had this interaction with a shaman here that I've never met. So he had, whatever he was doing had the side effect of setting me off in a particular direction. So I'm actually very grateful. I just wish I'd love to meet him. I'm not sure I'd be able to communicate because undoubtedly he's Czech, and I probably wouldn't be able to speak that level of language with him, but I'd love to meet him.
You thought about leaving him a note?
He left me a note, I think.
Oh.
If you watch the video, there was an iron railing. When he'd finished with everything, he put all the stones and materials over the side of this iron railings, fence, and then painted on the fence in Czech with some words. And at first I thought it was just graffiti. And then I started to think, well, hang on, this is written in the azimuth of all the stone designs, and behind is this pile of stones that is used. So maybe this is important. So I got one of my Czech friends and I took him and I said, read this. What does it mean? Because the middle word was somehow rubbed away and I couldn't decipher it. Anyway, my Czech friend came up with the phrase, I can hear the sound of the blood flowing in your body. Now, what graffiti artist would write something like that?
This guy must be quite something, to be honest. This sounds so interesting and fascinating. I hardly even have words for it. I think he means to say that on some level he already knows you, or knows of you at least. Well, or knows of you at least, but knows you
Good Lord.
on a way that you can only know in a magical sense.
Yeah, probably.
I think it's probably very likely the real deal. It's not even unlikely that a lot of people in that town know who he is, but they're just not telling.
I always found it bizarre that I seem to be the only person that noticed. I mean, there's these great big stone designs in full public view and people just kind of, back and forth, never. And I'm like, what the hell's this? What's he changed? Taking pictures and, trying to study everything. I seem to be the only person that saw this. It was bizarre. So given what your granny taught you and your interests, do you ever get into doing these kind of things out there in the world?
We do. I have a thing with making stone piles. It's
Really?
almost like a compulsion that I can't help. I don't make any particular designs, but when I see just a pile of stones there, or just some stones about, I pile them up. And I really like doing that. And I feel a real sense of accomplishment each time. My townsfolk saw me do it around town, and that actually got me the nickname of the rock merchant, because I was always carrying stones around. They find it a bit odd, but they think nothing of it. And one time that was really cool. I made a pile somewhere, and the next day somebody had placed a perfect fitting extra stone on top.
There you
No
go.
idea who it was, but it was very cool.
There you go. And that person's life has probably been changed by that very action.
Yeah, unfortunately, somebody else in front of whose abandoned house that was, somebody doesn't even live here, but he happened to own that abandoned house, found out about my rock pile and completely destroyed it
Oh dear.
twice. And I was
Twice. So you rebuilt it.
I did rebuild it out of spite mostly. But yeah, I was very unhappy about that. And I even accused somebody else about it. Some guy that lived around the corner, and he saw me do it a couple of times. He always gave me a weird look. So I went straight over to his house, knocked on the door, and started accusing him, like, hey, why are you doing these things? If you have something to say to me, you know where I live, come say it to my face. Guy had no idea what I was talking about. And I was really mad. I was even raising my voice at him. Turns out that the reason this guy was always giving me weird looks is because he's practically deaf and he could never hear me saying hi to him.
Yes.
We get along great now. We're friends.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's, I could have handled that better, but.
Yeah, well, how are you to know? Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
There's a lesson to be learned though, there isn't there? That you always assume, sometimes wrongly, what people's motivations are. Got to be careful.
Yeah, true.
So what else might I have asked you and didn't, because I don't know about it, but would be interesting to mention? It's a catch-all question, yeah.
Oh, well, I can tell you about all the weird experiences I had in forests and even here.
Right, that's a good topic. Let's do that, because I'm very much into weird experiences in forests. So
I'll start with the one that affected me physically. Years ago, I twisted my knee, and that knee was just busted every couple of months. Several times a year, that knee would just lock up. I would not be able to move on it. It'd be very, very painful. I always had to be very careful while hiking out here because it's a lot of steep hills, and that really impeded my movement. It was very frustrating. One thing, I was here at the valley, just at the bottom, which has a very strange energy that I cannot describe. And I felt two hands on my knee, just grabbing it like that. I startled. I'm not going to lie, that scared me. And I probably even made a little squeal or a
yeah.
And I had to back out of there. And at first I thought like, okay, this is a warning. I'm not supposed to go this way. I'm sorry. I will never do that again. I came back home and I had the actual shakes. That knee never hurt again. It has never locked up again, ever. And call me superstitious, but part of me is thinking like, okay, but if it can heal, it can probably also harm. So I'm feeling a certain way about it. I find it dubious. I'm grateful, don't get me wrong. I'm very happy about it, but I'm extra careful now. If I have to go down that valley, I make sure I only do it because I have to be there. I need something that is growing down there, and I will be leaving offerings when I take something, but I don't go there unless I absolutely have to. The other valley on the other side of this town has wolf packs running through it, and that valley feels safer to be in, knowing that they're there. And I've seen them. I've stood eye to eye with one of them, and yeah, they leave you alone. Italian wolves are not dangerous like that. They're not overly hostile. They can be, but they're not. They have enough food here. And when I was pregnant, I woke up once in the middle of the night because I had to pee for the 100th time that night. And I was already very pregnant. And I heard music, but distinct music. And it was strange music. It was haunting and eerie, but it wasn't unsettling or anything. But there was a haunting melody. And I could tell, like, okay, this is not coming from a house because the houses next and above me are not inhabited. It's coming from outside. And I was standing up, and I have this huge balcony door window, and I touched it to hear, like, is it coming from outside? And I put my hand on it, and immediately something in my head said, don't open it. So I didn't. And later I talked to other people about it, and they say, like, those are fairies, and it's a good thing that you didn't open the door because pregnant women, it's a whole thing. There's a whole mythology behind it, and it's just not safe. You don't want to mess with it. And I'm glad I didn't. And there have been other occasions that I am absolutely certain that I saw a fairy, even though they looked like people. They looked as real as you and me. There was not a single distinction or anything to tell you that that was anything else than a human except their behavior, which was so strange and off-putting. And also the time that I saw them, because I always saw them in the same swamp where I had my part-time job. And one of them, well, two of them, there were always a couple. No matter what time I was there, I always saw them. I never saw them anywhere else. It was a small town. This was not a large town. They were on foot. And the woman was always shouting, very loudly and aggressively shouting at the tree line as they were walking on the trail. And the guy was just walking next to her. And it was so bizarre. And I had this instinct of just stay clear of them. Don't even try to...
This sounds suspiciously like what I call liminal people. Go on, keep going.
Another time, I met a biker who was in full sports gear. He had a sport bike, a city sports bike. This was not a mountain bike at all. But he was just there in the swamp, standing. And when I crossed him, he said to me, "Excuse me, but do you happen to know the way to the main road?" So I explained to him, like, yeah, you have to go there. It's a couple of kilometers, turn left and then right again. You'll see the main road. And he goes, I won't be going there then. And he takes his sport bike and he goes into the swamp. And it wasn't long that I had to actually turn back and follow where he had just went. And I was so curious, like, oh, okay, where did he just go? And he wasn't there. He was just gone.
Yeah.
Another time there were people barbecuing with this mini portable barbecue in the middle of the swamp. And it's like, so what are you people doing here? Oh, we're barbecuing. But there wasn't any food on the barbecue. It made a hell of a lot of smoke. That's why I went to check it out. And I was like, but you're not allowed to do that here. Okay, yeah, we'll pack up and leave. I said, like, okay. And I left. And when I came back, they were gone. They hadn't left a single trace behind. Nothing.
I'm telling you, this sounds like what I call liminal people. Yeah, absolutely. The perfect example is the old woman surrounded by plastic bags, like old Tesco bags or whatever, sitting on somebody's like low brick fence with a wooden fence above it with a gap. And she had her hands and she was in the gap somehow, as if she was reaching for something. And she looked as if she was probably about 85, and she looked homeless. I mean, just totally wrong clothing, all weird clothing. And I was dowsing, and I'm like, okay. And I carry on, and I went a bit further up the street. I found my line. I turned back to check it, and I'm walking back down, and this woman in her 80s, and all of her plastic bags and everything, gone. Not a trace. I even stopped dowsing and went running around all the streets looking for her. Gone. It's what I call liminal people.
And do you think that these people live in a parallel reality that somehow overlaps ours?
That's always been my view. I mean, you sort of said fairies. Maybe maybe that one and the same thing. My view is that they're on the edge of our reality. They live in like a parallel universe, and because I was dowsing, my energy and consciousness was up, and so I was seeing something that under normal circumstances I wouldn't see. That's what I've always suspected. And I have a late friend. She and her priest, I guess, they went around magic circles in England doing some ritual work. And she said to me on numerous occasions, someone would show up in the middle of the ritual with like a big dog and look totally incongruous, like in a suit and tie or some kind of a strange coat. And just stand and watch. And once or twice they'd said, would you like to join us? Oh no, I'll just watch. And then when they finished the ritual, they turn around, there's no sign of this person, yeah? So they always felt like it was the sort of guardian of the place, right? The guardian of the place, just watching that they were using it correctly, and not doing something nefarious. But again, I call these people liminal people. And I swear, there's one that I've seen in Brno a couple of times dowsing, and I call him Santa Claus because he's got a big white beard and white hair and a big belly and a red shirt. And I've seen him sat with his back against a derelict garage that somebody had used as like a car workshop, just watching me. And I've walked and then turned around, nobody there, gone, disappeared completely. I've seen him twice.
This shapeshifter twice. But a genuine shapeshifter, and it was one of the strangest things I ever saw. And it's the same one I saw twice in two different locations. First time I was walking from my grandparents' home, and I'm about to cross the street, and these are conjoined houses. There are no spaces in between. There's this cat running on the streets. It's just a cat. I cross the street, I see this cat, and I look to my left to see if there's a car coming. This was also already dark, but it was not late at night. And exactly where that cat would be, at the speed it was running, was a person standing. But this person was dressed like a teenager, like a skater boy. He had this big head of black curls or dark-haired curls. They had no face. There were no facial features. And I couldn't have been more than 20 meter, max 20 meter away from that guy. And I had such a feeling of, what the hell? And in that moment, I couldn't even think like, okay, but I have to get home. I have to get home. It's so surreal, this whole thing. And I think like, okay, I just didn't see it right. I'll cross the street and watch again. I watch again. I see that damn cat sitting there. Just this white and gray cat just sitting there like, Mer. Oh, okay, no, Tina, you're seeing things. You're seeing things. Years later, 10 years later, I live in a whole other city. It's after work. It's much later. It wasn't even the same time. And I hear cats outside. Two cats, when they're facing off, they make a lot of noise, a lot of posing going on. And I think that is so weird. There aren't any cats like that in my city. There's too much traffic. But I live in a dead-end alley on the second floor. So I go outside to look, and I see indeed two cats facing off. One is just a tabby cat, and the other is a gray and white cat. So I just do psh, psh, because it's loud, it's annoying. I want to go to bed. One runs away, the tabby runs that way, and I follow her. And I look back at the other one, and there is a person standing there, dark curls in a suit, facing right at me, looking up, no face. And I felt so shaken, that sinking feeling I had, because I recognized him immediately, even though I had practically forgotten about that thing, like, oh, what the hell? And I remember stumbling back from the window like, what the hell? I mean, what? No, this isn't real. And I was startled, and I was really shaken about it. And I went back to the window eventually, because I couldn't bring myself to look back, because I was actually afraid at that moment.
Yeah, obviously.
And I look back, and there's nothing. There's nothing. That street is dead quiet. I didn't hear any footsteps going away. Bizarre, just bizarre. And I have to say, I never felt threatened by that thing. I was afraid because it was just so weird and so shockingly strange and surreal. But that second time that he looked up, well, the first time I saw him, that thing looked intrigued, almost like, well, that's funny. There's a human there. Hello, human. Almost like that. And the second time it was like, he looked at me a bit annoyed almost, but not threateningly, like, did you really have to do that? I didn't like that. I didn't appreciate that. And then, it was also closer the second time, much closer, like right there under the window. And I think that's what frightened me, the proximity.
Well, for sure, there's more in the world than people know, and and I think I've had my fair share of exposure to some of them. Sounds like you have too. And it keeps me eternally occupied. That's my love, is these sort of stories and collecting those stories. I love hearing these stories. And when you've heard thousands and thousands of them, there are patterns that they group, into kind of shared experiences. So I'm absolutely convinced that there is another reality that we're just having glimpses of that explains a lot of this phenomena.
There's research done that when you take psychedelics like mushrooms, that they actually break down inhibitors of the brain. So you actually see more. And that I always found fascinating. That is fascinating. So you actually see more in a psychedelic state. It's not an hallucination. You just observe more.
Yeah. Could be. I will ask you then at this stage, would you tell us where, if people want to find out about you or things that you're doing, creating, where they would go?
Well, I have a YouTube channel. My contact information is on there. If anybody would like a rune reading, I'll happily do that. All the details are on my YouTube accounts. I don't make runes at the moment because that just takes too much time, too much effort. And with the baby right now, that I don't find the time to do it. And a lot of work goes into that. But a rune reading I will always do, and gladly, although I do it for payment. I don't do it for free. And that is really it.
But you also do a podcast, right?
Yes, I do, actually, with Fiona Edgar, who's an astrologer, which is on her channel. That is Fiona Edgar Astrologer.
Right.
But
Okay.
you will find the link to that in my YouTube account as well.
Sounds good. All right. Tina, thank you very much for spending some time. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I'm truly honored and I really enjoyed myself.